Police found Hackman and his wife dead in their New Mexico home.
February 26th, authorities arrive at the home of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa to a disturbing discovery. Both had been dead for weeks, or so it seemed. The official report determined that Betsy succumbed first, the victim of a rare virus, leaving Gene to an uncertain fate. But then, an anomaly emerged. Evidence of a phone call made after Betsy's reported time of death. A call that should have been impossible. If she was already gone, who answered? And if the timeline is in question, what else might authorities have missed? This is the unsettling case of Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's mysterious deaths, and the phone call that changes everything. The childhood trauma that shaped him. Gene Hackman's journey is the kind that turns into Hollywood legend. A guy from California who clawed his way into the business, powered through rejection, and kept going strong for nearly 50 years. But before all the fame, life wasn't exactly easy. Born in 1930 in San Bernardino, California, Hackman spent his early years constantly on the move because of his dad's job in newspapers. Eventually, his family settled in Danville, Illinois, moving in with his grandparents. That's where things took a darker turn. One of his neighbors, someone he liked, was involved in a murder-suicide. He was just a kid, but that moment stuck with him. Even if he didn't fully understand it at the time, he knew something terrible had happened. But the one constant source of warmth in his life was his mother, Lydia. She was the one who introduced him to the movies, his greatest escape. The theater became his sanctuary, a place where anything felt possible. One day, as they sat together in the dark, she turned to him and said she wanted to see him up on that screen. It was a simple remark, but it was enough. That moment planted the seed, setting him on a path that would define the rest of his life. Then, at 13, Hackman's life took another dramatic turn. His parents separated, and his father simply drove away, waving goodbye as he disappeared down the street. Hackman later described it as a real adios. Perhaps that early lesson in fleeting connections shaped his ability to convey depth in even the smallest gestures on screen. His relationship with his father remained complicated. Discipline often crossed the line into something harsher, leaving Hackman to seek refuge where he could. As a child, he created a personal sanctuary, a cardboard box in the basement. It may have seemed trivial, but to him, it was a place of safety in an unpredictable world. That kind of childhood didn't make the teenage years any easier. Hackman wasn't bitter, but he was hurt. Loved his dad, but that didn't change the fact that he left. He always said dysfunctional families produced a lot of good actors. Maybe that was his way of making sense of it all. School wasn't much of a refuge either. He kept to himself, grew up shy, not necessarily a bad thing though. He figured acting might help him work through that. But even if he was quiet, he still managed to get into trouble. Got himself arrested once for stealing candy and soda. Then, after a fight with the basketball coach, he quit school altogether. At 16, he started lying about his age to get into the Marines. But that didn't exactly go as planned. The next few months were a whirlwind. After completing basic training in South Carolina, he was deployed to China aboard a military ship. Initially assigned as a radio operator, he soon found himself on the air as a DJ for Armed Forces Radio in the Pacific. His service took him to Qingdao, Shanghai, and later Hawaii. While he enjoyed the broadcasting work, military discipline proved challenging. Following orders was not his strong suit, and he was demoted 3 times. He openly admitted that he was not a good Marine, at one point earning the rank of corporal only to be promptly demoted. Then, a motorcycle crash changed everything. He sustained severe injuries to his shoulder, knee, and leg. After a thorough evaluation, doctors deemed him unfit for active duty, bringing his military career to an abrupt end. Hackman's struggles for fame. After that, Hackman drifted, tried journalism school, but that didn't work out. So, he went back to that childhood dream. He wanted to be an actor, That led him to California, where he enrolled at the Pasadena Playhouse. There he met two guys who were also trying to make it, Dustin Hoffman and Robert Duvall. He and Hoffman hit it off right away. Hackman was older, and Hoffman, the oddball. Back then, Hollywood had a certain look they wanted for their leading men, and neither Hackman nor Hoffman fit the mold. At the Pasadena Playhouse, they were even voted least likely to succeed. Hackman got the lowest grade the school had ever given out and was kicked out after just 1 year. But quitting? Not an option. Determined to make it, Hackman moved to New York, living at the YMCA while chasing auditions. Roles were scarce, so he took whatever work he could find. One of the toughest? Polishing leather furniture overnight in the Chrysler Building, because during the day, the chairs were in use. He wasn't good at it. Another job had him working as a doorman at a Times Square hotel, a role that stung more than the rest. Then came the moment that changed everything. His former drill instructor happened to pass by, barely acknowledging him before delivering a cutting remark, calling him a sorry excuse for a man. It was a wake-up call. Humiliated but driven, Hackman knew he had to push harder. Then, in 1962, tragedy struck when Hackman's mother, Lydia, died in a house fire. She had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, igniting the mattress. Her death was a profound loss for Hackman. She had been the one to raise him after his father left. Perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect was that she never had the chance to see him act. The thought remained with him throughout his career, knowing she would have been proud. But Hackman wasn't done. Determined to make his mark, he continued working tirelessly, securing roles in television series filmed in New York during the early 1960s, including Naked City and The Defenders. Then, in 1964, he landed his first film role in Lilith, starring alongside Warren Beatty, already an established name, and Gene Seberg. Despite its promising cast, the film failed to find success. This may not seem like a turning point at first, but it was. When Warren Beatty began assembling Bonnie and Clyde in 1967, he recalled working with Gene Hackman on Lilith and insisted to director Arthur Penn that Hackman was the right choice to play Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother. The film was a major success, cementing Beatty as a leading man and transforming Hackman's career. After years of struggling in relative obscurity, Bonnie and Clyde put him on the map with an Academy Award nomination. However, his next few films did little to build on that momentum. It would take 9 more roles before he landed another breakthrough, The French Connection. As Popeye Doyle, Hackman delivered a defining performance, the moment that made him a true Hollywood star, just as Bonnie and Clyde had done for Beatty. The real story of Hackman and Betsy's love. The exact moment Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa met remains unclear, but what is known is that their paths crossed at a fitness center in California, where Arakawa was working part-time. By the time the New York Times reported on their relationship in 1989, they had already been living together for 5 years, indicating a well-established partnership. While the specifics of how their relationship began are not widely documented, some speculate that it may have overlapped with the final stages of Hackman's first marriage to Faye Maltese. However, Hackman himself has maintained that his relationship with Arakawa only began after his marriage to Maltese had ended. During his marriage to Faye Maltese, Gene Hackman was entirely consumed by his career. Determined to establish himself in Hollywood, he understood that rejecting roles could jeopardize everything he had worked for. He later acknowledged that after years of struggling to prove his talent, turning down opportunities felt unthinkable. But such relentless ambition came at a cost. But life gave him a second shot at love. He and Arakawa just clicked, and this time, it lasted. He talked about their life together in an interview, describing a quiet, happy routine. Friday date nights, watching indie films, just enjoying each other's company. When they got together, they moved into a mansion in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Before that, Hackman had been living in Montecito with Maltese, in a Mediterranean-style home that he later admitted felt too formal. So when he and Arakawa found this place in Santa Fe, it was a fresh start. The house itself, kind of a wreck at first. According to local architect Stephen Samuelson, it was an abandoned 1950s block building, falling apart but sitting on an amazing piece of land. Hackman and Arakawa got to work, completely transforming it with the help of Samuelson and another architect, Harry Dapel. Hackman was hands-on with every little detail, so much so that if he didn't get updates fast enough, he'd personally call to check in. Arakawa was just as involved, working alongside him to bring their vision to life. They filled the house with pieces they picked up from Santa Fe, auctions in New York, and even an antique shop in Germany. Everything in that house told a story about them. Then came a health scare. In 1990, Hackman had a close call with a heart attack. He checked into a hospital in Portland with chest pains, and doctors said they caught it just in time. The artery was dangerously close to shutting down completely. That experience changed things. A year later, in 1991, Hackman admitted that his heart problems made him rethink his career. He wasn't in a rush to get back to work, and after taking 8 months off, he realized he didn't miss it as much as he thought he would. That same year, after 7 years together, Hackman and Arakawa got married, and a few years later, in 1999, they decided to expand their little family by adopting a dog. While Hackman was filming The Replacements in 2000, a stray dog wandered onto set. The crew took him to an animal rescue shelter, and Hackman and Arakawa decided to adopt him. The shelter named the dog Gene. Before finalizing the adoption, they ensured their 2 German shepherds in New Mexico would be comfortable with the new addition. Despite Hackman's status as a Hollywood star, he and Arakawa followed the standard adoption process without any special treatment. According to shelter staff, Hackman repeatedly expressed his gratitude and even apologized for taking up their time. Their commitment to their pets went far beyond casual ownership. To them, the dogs were family. Their animal chiropractor noted that Betsy and Jean prioritized their pets' well-being above all else, consistently seeking the best care available. Gene Hackman's mysterious Hollywood exit. When Gene Hackman stopped taking new roles in the early 2000s, he was in his mid-70s and starting to really feel the weight of a long, demanding career. But it wasn't until a doctor's visit that he realized just how much it had taken a toll on him. The stress of acting, the constant meetings, and the non-stop pace. It was all too much. And at his age, with his health on the line, he decided it was time to walk away. Even after stepping back, though, he didn't make a big announcement. He left the door open just in case something irresistible came along. But nothing did, and before long, he settled into his quieter life in New Mexico with his wife, Betsy Arakawa. He kept busy, riding his bike, working in the yard, and becoming quite the handyman. Eventually, in 2008, he made it official. No big press conference, no dramatic farewell, just a simple decision that acting, as much as he loved it, had become too stressful. Hackman always emphasized that it wasn't Hollywood he missed, but the craft itself. The meticulous process of shaping a character, exploring deep questions, and breathing life into a role. Though his passion for acting never faded, he understood that stepping away was the right decision. Yet, even in retirement, the sight of film crews in Santa Fe, trailers lining the roads, occasionally stirred a familiar longing. Still, he never returned to the screen. Instead, when acting was no longer an option, he channeled his creative energy into a new pursuit, writing. Back in the late 90s, he teamed up with undersea archaeologist Daniel Lenihan to write an adventure novel set in the 19th century. The book did well, and they kept at it, putting out 2 more historical novels over the next decade. Then, Hackman branched out on his own, writing a western and a crime thriller. His books earned solid reviews, proving that even in retirement, that creative fire was still burning. Writing became his means of staying relevant, a new way to tell stories beyond the screen. He often credited his wife for refining his style, her edits and suggestions shaping the rhythm of his work. She meticulously typed his handwritten drafts, playing an essential role in his transition from actor to author. Their partnership, both personal and creative, remained steadfast. After stepping away from the public eye, Hackman and Arakawa embraced a life of privacy. Residing in Santa Fe, they kept a low profile, content with a quiet, unassuming existence. Despite his storied Hollywood past, those around him knew him simply as a private man, uninterested in attention or acclaim. A longtime friend described him as reserved, someone who never sought the spotlight. They were known to be warm and courteous to locals, yet rarely seen in public. One neighbor even noted that despite living nearby for years, they had never crossed paths. But within the confines of their home, Hackman and Arakawa had built a life centered on love and companionship. Friends spoke of their unwavering bond, often describing them as one of the most inseparable couples they had ever known, a pair who truly belonged together. The tragic cost of Hackman's career. Gene Hackman was deep in the Hollywood game, which meant he wasn't around as much as he probably wanted to be while his kids were growing up. And with fame, things got even trickier for his 3 kids: Christopher, Elizabeth, and Leslie. He admitted that being the child of a celebrity wasn't easy, and on top of that, his career kept him away more than he'd have liked. That kind of thing doesn't just go away. It sits there, always in the background. Over time, the distance just grew. By 2011, Hackman and his son Christopher had lost touch so much that giving advice would have been tough. He even looked back and wondered if being away on set all the time was the reason their bond never really stuck. And even though he had a good relationship with his youngest daughter, Leslie, by the time he passed, she admitted they hadn't spoken in months. And then there's another layer to this whole story, one that makes it even sadder. In the months before she passed, Betsy Arakawa stopped talking to her elderly mother, Yoshi Feaster. And Yoshi was dealing with dementia. The whole thing was heartbreaking. Betsy had a routine. She'd check in with her mom every month or two, but then nothing. The last call? October. Even the housekeeper started wondering what was going on. But see, as Gene Hackman's health started to slip, Betsy Arakawa made a choice. She put everything into taking care of him. She became his full-time caregiver, locked in on making sure he had everything he needed. People who knew them said the same thing. She was dedicated, protective, always there, and she was serious about it too. After COVID, she went all in, focusing on his diet, keeping him active. His youngest daughter, Leslie, even mentioned that he was doing Pilates and yoga a few times a week, and she made sure to point out how much she appreciated the effort Betsy put in. And here's the thing: Hackman knew it. He knew how much his wife was doing for him, how much she cared. His friend Tom Allen said it himself. Hackman truly believed that if it weren't for Betsy Arakawa,
kind of what happens to people who steep their lives in...
he wouldn't have made it as long as he did. Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's strange death. February 26th, a neighbor calls in for a welfare check. And when the sheriff's office rolls up to Gene Hackman and Betsy Arakawa's home in New Mexico, what they find is bad. Both of them gone. Turns out, they weren't the first to stumble across the scene. A pest control worker had knocked on the door earlier. No answer. That's when he got a neighborhood security officer involved, who peeked through a window and saw the bodies. Emergency services got the call right after that. Thing is, the 911 caller didn't even know who they were. Just that they were a man and a woman. You can hear the panic in his voice. The whole call is a mess. He's trying to get help sent up there, but the house doesn't have a proper address. Dogs are barking nonstop, and the guy just keeps saying "damn" over and over. He's crying, overwhelmed. They even cut his name from the public version of the call. Inside, it's worse than anyone could have expected. Hackman and Arakawa were in separate parts of the house. Hackman in the mudroom near the kitchen, Arakawa in the bathroom, and Zina, one of their 3 dogs, found dead inside a closed kennel. The scene was grim. Arakawa's body had already begun to break down. The report detailed the signs: facial bloating, mummification of the hands and feet. Hackman showed similar signs. Mummification occurs when a body dries out after death, and from the evidence, it appears Hackman may have fallen. His sunglasses were found beside him, and he remained fully dressed. Then the realization set in. They had been there for weeks. When the sheriff addressed the media, he had no definitive answer on who passed first. The timeline was too close to determine. Then, on March 7th, New Mexico's chief medical examiner, Heather Jarrell, provided the long-awaited answers. Betsy was the first to go. The cause, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare but deadly disease contracted from rodent droppings. According to Santa Fe Sheriff Adan Mendoza, her last known communication was an email sent on February 11th. As for Hackman, Gerald determined he likely survived for several days, unaware that Betsy had already passed. His pacemaker recorded its final activity on February 17th, suggesting he died the following day. An autopsy confirmed severe heart disease, high blood pressure, and advanced Alzheimer's as contributing factors. His stomach was empty, there was no food left. And the dog? No official cause of death has been determined. However, the New Mexico state veterinarian suspects starvation or dehydration. The two other dogs, however, survived. They are now under care, according to Joey Padilla, who operates a local dog care business. Just as authorities began piecing together the timeline, a new twist emerged. The presumed timing of Betsy's death was called into question when ABC News reported that she had placed a call to Cloudberry, a medical concierge service, on the morning of February 12th, one day after she was believed to have died. The mystery of Betsy's last call. Dr. Josiah Child, the man behind Cloudberry Health in New Mexico, just dropped a bombshell that shakes up the whole timeline of Betsy Arakawa's death. He says she called his clinic on February 12th, one day after the medical examiner claimed she had already died on February 11th. According to him, that just doesn't add up. He remembers her reaching out a couple of weeks before that, asking about an echocardiogram for her husband. She wasn't even his patient, but somebody had recommended Cloudberry Health to her. She set up an appointment for February 12th, but then, 2 days before, she canceled, saying her husband wasn't feeling well. That could have been the end of it, but then, on the morning of February 12th, she called back. She spoke to one of the doctors in his office, and they scheduled her to come in that afternoon, but she never showed. Child says there was nothing about breathing problems in that call. Nothing that suggested she was in any kind of respiratory distress. They tried calling her back a few times, but she never answered. And that's where things start to get weird. Because if Arakawa was talking to his office on the morning of February 12th, how could she have already been dead on the 11th? And that's not all. Child doesn't believe hantavirus killed her either. He admits he's not an expert. But from what he knows, hantavirus patients usually die in the hospital. They struggle to breathe, and their condition worsens over days, not hours. But Arakawa? She spoke to his office on February 10th, then again on the 12th, and she never mentioned any trouble breathing. Meanwhile, over in Los Angeles, another doctor is casting even more doubt on the hantavirus claim. They say medical professionals are baffled by it. Respiratory failure doesn't just sneak up on you, it builds. Most people suffering from it end up in the ER gasping for air. For someone like Arakawa, a 65-year-old who seemed fine, to just drop dead from it, that doesn't make sense. In fact, nobody's ever heard of anything like that happening. But then, according to a timeline from USA Today, Arakawa was seen running errands on February 11th. Surveillance footage captures her, masked, shopping at Sprouts Farmers Market and CVS, an indication she may have already been feeling unwell. She returned home shortly after 5 p.m. From that point on, there were no phone calls, no sightings, no further signs of life. Dr. Child's account directly challenges the medical examiner's report. According to the official findings, the cause of death was hantavirus, with an estimated time of death around February 11th. However, records indicate that Arakawa was still making phone calls on February 12th. This inconsistency raises a critical question: what really happened? Unanswered questions about Hackman's final moments. Gene Hackman's daughter, Elizabeth Jean Hackman, revealed to TMZ that while the family remains uncertain about the exact cause, they suspect toxic fumes, possibly carbon monoxide poisoning, may have been a factor. Sheriff Mendoza stated that both the gas company and fire department conducted tests for hazardous fumes before deputies entered the scene. However, just hours later, an affidavit from New Mexico authorities classified the deaths as suspicious, prompting a full investigation. When police arrived, they found the front door unlocked and open. One dog was roaming the property while another was near Betsy's body. Inside, things seemed off. A heater had been moved. A pill bottle was open with pills scattered near Betsy, and Hackman was found in a different room. With no obvious signs of a gas leak, authorities decided to dig deeper. Later, they found Tylenol along with thyroid and blood pressure medications in the house. Sheriff Adam Mendoza initially stated that while foul play had not been entirely ruled out, he was confident it was unlikely. Ultimately, investigators determined there was no evidence to suggest criminal involvement. According to the search warrant, deputies found no signs of forced entry. In the same interview, Mendoza explained why he believed Hackman and Betsy had died simultaneously. He noted the absence of movement within the house, the lack of stolen items, and the preliminary autopsy findings, which showed no signs of blunt force trauma. With foul play ruled out, investigators turned to carbon monoxide poisoning as the next logical explanation. This invisible, odorless gas can accumulate in the bloodstream, leading to severe health complications and, in some cases, death. It's a danger often overlooked. Many people forget to check the batteries in their carbon monoxide detectors. Notably, there were no visible injuries on either Hackman or Betsy. A Santa Fe detective's affidavit, obtained by People, stated that an inspection of the home's pipes revealed no apparent issues. However, when asked whether a gas leak could have occurred at some point, Detective Mendoza acknowledged the possibility. He explained that because the house was powered by natural gas, any leak may have dissipated before investigators arrived, leaving no trace behind. Another key piece of evidence in the investigation was the prescription pill bottle discovered near Betsy. Mendoza emphasized its significance, confirming that it was submitted to the medical investigator's office for further analysis. The toxicology report, which could take several months to complete, was expected to shed more light on the case. After the heartbreaking news of Hackman and Betsy's passing, tributes poured in from fans and colleagues alike. Clint Eastwood, who directed Unforgiven, the film that earned Hackman the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 1992, expressed his deep sorrow. Morgan Freeman, who collaborated with Hackman on Unforgiven and Under Suspicion, reflected on their time together, describing Hackman as an extraordinary talent and calling their work together one of the highlights of his career. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, comment, and turn on post notifications to stay updated with our latest content.